What's going on, guys? It's Danny from Fantasy Stock Exchange here, bringing you the top waiver wire ads post week one, entering week two for fantasy football. So again, this series is actually going to be coming out every Tuesday. You should be seeing this around 12:30 or 1 for this episode, but I'm typically going to try to get them out for earlier in the morning for you guys. But yeah, just going to be talking about the biggest performances from potential waiver wire options during week one. I mean, buckle in, boys. We got 15 more weeks to go. Well, 16 if you count the bye. But just glad to have football back under wraps for this season. So, yeah, just going to be talking about the top performing waiver wire type players and who you should spend your FAAB on, how much FAAB you should spend, whether you should use your top waiver wire priority, and just going through all of that today. But before we do that, let's hit the intro. Okay, so as I mentioned, going first, we're actually going to be talking about the top waiver wire quarterback. So we're going to mention Kirk Cousins from the Minnesota Vikings. So his current ownership in terms of Yahoo is actually at 35%. So just going over his week one performance against Green Bay again, 259 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, had 4 carries for 34 yards, and a 2-point convert. So he ended up producing 22.76 points in 4-point touchdown leagues. Going into week two, he plays the Indianapolis Colts, who absolutely just got shredded by Jacksonville. We're going to actually mention the Jacksonville quarterback, little hint later in the video, next discussion. But the Indianapolis defense allowed 3 passing touchdowns, and the Vikings in general just have a consistent offense as they put it on display against the Packers defense. So when you're talking FAAB potential, I wouldn't spend more than 5%, nothing crazy. He'll most likely be just a high floor backup if you took a chance at your quarterback one spot. But in a one quarterback league, a guy like Kirk Cousins, who has shown to be a consistent top 15 option for the past 5 years, is definitely a good ad, especially against a Colts defense that, again, did not have their best showing against Jaguars. So if you need him to play this week, I would feel comfortable with throwing him into my lineup as soon as week 2. So going into the next edition, we're going to be talking about Gardner-Minchu from the Jacksonville Jaguars. So as you see on the screen, week 1 against Indianapolis, we just mentioned how their defense did against the Jaguars. Well, the Jaguars' pivot is Gardner-Minchu. He was able to put up 173 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, and he rushed for 5 carries for 19 yards. All in all, producing 20.82 fantasy points and 4-point touchdown leagues. So week 2, he does play the Tennessee Titans. So again, that's a tough matchup for week 2. But looking past that, he gets to play the Miami Dolphins, Cincinnati Bengals, Houston Texans, and Detroit Lions before his week 7 bye. So definitely a very favorable stretch in terms of scheduling after that week 2 matchup. Again, if you're going to pick him up off the waivers, wouldn't necessarily throw him into your lineup against that Titans tough defense, but after that, he's got a nice little stretch of games. So talking about FAAB potential, again, 5%, similar to Cousins in a one quarterback league. I will not blow a ton of FAAB on a waiver wire quarterback, but Gardner is well worth the 5% again with that slate of matchups on the schedule. So, again, general rule of thumb as well, I mentioned the waiver wire priority. Don't spend it on a quarterback. If you have top priority, make sure you're using it on a running back or a receiver for the most part. And we're actually going to mention one really high upside tight end later on as well. So, going into the next quarterback, we're going to be talking about Mitch Trubisky, quarterback from the Chicago Bears. So he's currently owned in 3% of Yahoo leagues. So again, week 1 against Detroit, put on a clinic. I mean, 242 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. And he had that, you love to see the rushing upside. He had 3 carries for 26 yards. So all in all, 24.28 fantasy points in 4-point touchdown leagues. So again, week 2, he does face the New York Giants. The Giants just gave up 22.06 fantasy points to Big Ben this Monday night. If you guys are watching this on the Tuesday, would have been last night. And in 2019, the Giants gave up the 3rd most point per game to the quarterback position at 21.6. So again, great week 2 matchup. You can put him into your lineup right away. Following week 2, Mitch gets Atlanta, Indianapolis, Tampa Bay, and Carolina, all favorable matchups. So if you're talking about FAAB potential, I wouldn't mind like maximum if you're going to do 5%, but typically I would probably hover around that 3% range simply because while the other guys, in my opinion, do have the starting jobs locked down for the rest of the season, I would not necessarily bid as much for Mitch as them, simply because if he has any single down stretch, down game, the Chicago Bears can just look towards Nick Foles as a potential replacement. So it's got a little bit more risk baked in, so that kind of gets him to that 3% as opposed to the 5%. So still a really good option, especially with those matchups on the slate. So next, we got Jimmy Garoppolo from the San Francisco 49ers. So again, we're doing this at a threshold where if they're 55% owned or less, we'll talk about them. So he just meets that threshold at that 52% ownership on Yahoo. Again, recapping his week 1, 259 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. And he also rushed for 9 yards on that 1 carry. 17.14 PPR, not PPR, but 4-point passing touchdown points. So again, not necessarily a great showing in week 1, but, solid. If you put him into your lineup, you definitely wouldn't be disappointed with that stat line. And it's just going to go up for week 2 because he does play that New York Jets defense that got absolutely shredded by Josh Allen. 28.18 fantasy points by Josh Allen in that game, or the QB4 on the week. The Jets defense just simply lacks the talent to actually fend off opposing offenses for the 2020 season. Again, lost C.J. Mosley for the season, lost Avery Williamson, and, of course, the biggest loss on their defense just so happened to be that trade of Jamal Adams prior to the season. So, again, following week 2, Jimmy has a very favorable schedule that features the Giants, Eagles, and Dolphins from weeks 3 to 5. So, again, you're getting that week 2 to 5 stretch with a really, really nice schedule from Jimmy Garoppolo. So, again, similar to Mitch Trubisky, I'd probably bid around 3%. The reason why it's only at 3 as opposed to the 5 of the other guys is because with Jimmy Garoppolo, again, he's very attached to a run-heavy offense which would limit his passing volume. So I don't necessarily believe he's going to have the passing volume of the other guys, and I'm mentioning the actual rushing factor. Again, Mitch Trubisky, Gardner-Minchu both have legs. We showed Kirk Cousins actually had 34 rushing yards. You're simply not going to get that with a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo. So that's why he's here at that 3% range, but still a fine option with that slate of schedule that he's going to be facing up. So heading off the quarterbacks and going into the running backs, we're going to be talking about Nyheim Hines, running back from the Indianapolis Colts, who currently has a 20% ownership in Yahoo League. So recapping his week 1, he was just phenomenal, looked great. Talking about it, 7 carries. It was actually one that surprised me. I thought he would probably be in that 4 to 5 range. So seeing him get 7 was definitely encouraging to see. 28 rushing yards, and then why he's on this list. 8 targets, 8 receptions, 45 receiving yards, and 2 total scores. So, again, the narrative that's always going to be pushed is Phillip Rivers loves throwing it to his running backs, and as you can see there, I mean, he had 8 targets, 8 receptions. Jonathan Taylor had 6 receptions. Like, there was a lot of targets to go around in that Colts backfield, so we did see Nyheim Hines eventually enter that kind of, I don't want to say scat back, but receiving option role for a Phillip Rivers-led team. So, talking about week 2, Minnesota just allowed 8 catches to the running backs last week and over 100 rushing yards. Indy should be playing catch-up because, again, I do believe that overall the Vikings have a superior team and will bounce back off that loss to the Packers. But if that's the case, I mean, Nyheim Hines is going to be on the field a lot. It's going to be uber efficient, hyper-targeted. I mean, this is just an option with Marlon Mack out for the season. I mean, Hines and Taylor are going to be every week starters, in my opinion. Again, if you're in standard, you maybe would be less inclined to go for a guy like Nyheim Hines. But, I mean, if you're talking about half and full PPR formats, I do think at the minimum he can give you top 25 production, top 30 production on a week in, week out basis for Nyheim Hines. So talking about FAAB potential, I wouldn't even be opposed to spending 45-50% on a guy like this. His role is locked for the season, in my opinion. Again, Jonathan Taylor is going to be that, I don't want to call him a bruiser, but he'll take a lot of the inside carries, first and down work, while Nyheim Hines could see a ton of receiving work and that third down type duty. So definitely like Nyheim Hines. Breaking it down again, without Marlon Mack, Rivers is going to rely on him a ton. So bidding 45% is definitely reasonable in my opinion. So talking about the next running back, we're going to go into Benny Snell, running back from the Pittsburgh Steelers, currently with a 17% ownership for the Yahoo. So week 1 against the Giants, 19 rushing attempts, 113 yards. Only had 1 target, unfortunate, and he didn't have a catch. But I mean, I'm gonna mention why he's the biggest pickup right now, and that is James Conner. The health status of James Conner is unknown. Went down in that week 1 tilt after only 6 carries, did not return to the game. So he's definitely a big question mark at this point. And if James Conner misses any time, Benny Snell is going to be at the minimum RB2 in my opinion. Low end RB2. high-end flex play that is ultimately going to supplement a ton of points because, again, as we mentioned all offseason, although James Conner's a fine back, whoever's running in that Pittsburgh system is going to be able to produce from a fantasy point perspective. Again, high octane offense, very good offensive line. I do think the running back that's going to get the workload is going to perform. And at this current juncture with the Connor injury, Benny Snell is in line to receive a ton of work. So mentioning his week 2 matchup, again, Denver was able to hold Derrick Henry to 131 total yards on 34 total touches. 3.85 yards per touch. Definitely limited a very good running back. So again, if you win Snell off the waivers, I wouldn't necessarily just thrust him into your lineup. I would try to stash him maybe for week 3 and on because, again, that Denver Broncos defense is very stifling. But if you have to throw him into your lineup, I mean, he's going to get the workload if James Conner misses any time. So just his upside is not going to be there against Denver. But week 3 and on, fire him up. Talking about a overall FAAB potential, I'd bid around 35%, maybe 40%, depending on the status of James Conner. Again, the sprained ankle is definitely a concern. So monitor that, see what any news that happens over the course of today, and ultimately you're going to have to put the waiver in. But if anything else doesn't really get released by the end of today, I would still feel fine putting in that 35% because, again, that Pittsburgh situation is so ideal that Benny Snell is going to be a performer if he is able to get that job with Connor out. So talking about the next guy, we're going to talk about Malcolm Brown, running back from the LA Rams, 26% ownership in Yahoo. Again, we all saw the Sunday night game. We all saw what he was able to do against my beloved Dallas Cowboys. Again, 18 rushing attempts, 79 rushing yards, and 2 scores. And he did have a little role in the receiving game as well with 4 targets, 3 receptions, and 31 receiving yards. So, again, talking about week 2, he enters a matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. They're a beat-up team that just lost to Washington, the football team. Philly allowed 2 rushing touchdowns, 65 rushing yards, and 3 receptions to the running backs. Brown should see high volume and touchdown upside once again. Talking about Malcolm Brown, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Cam Akers. I think by week 6 at the max, he's going to end up taking a huge role in the offense. But for the meantime, Malcolm Brown, as we saw, 22 total opportunities in that game against Dallas. There is a ton of volume to go around between those running backs. Again, did not expect Jared Goff to only throw it 31 times. But if that's going to be their game plan on offense, heck, both those Rams running backs are going to be viable, especially if Malcolm Brown is taking that lead role as he showed on Sunday night. He's definitely worth that 25 to 30% range. And if you have to bid a little bit more, you need a guy who can step in these next few weeks. Malcolm Brown is a fine pickup for these next few weeks especially. Again, I do think Cam Akers is going to take the lead back or featured back job soon, but at the end of the day here, if you're getting a running back with the amount of upside that Malcolm Brown has for the next few weeks, even if you're only getting that production for the next few, these early season matchups are the most important in fantasy because they set the tone for the rest of the year. So if Malcolm Brown can get you a win in these next few weeks, heck, he's going to be worth that 25-30% of FAAB. So again, he's going to be a little game script dependent. I don't necessarily believe he's going to have a ton of receiving work every single game. But, I mean, the Rams are a good team. They should figure to be in most games. That ultimately, I do think his usage for the next few weeks is going to be outstanding. So, talking about Malcolm Brown, good pickup. Next running back, guy we've been touting on the channel for the whole offseason, and that's going to be Chase Edmunds, running back from the Arizona Cardinals, currently at 40% ownership. So, again, just going over his week 1 against San Francisco, he had 6 rushing attempts for 26 rushing yards and 5 targets, 3 receptions, 19 receiving yards, 1 total touchdown. So, definitely good to see that he was still involved in the offense. Again, people have been touting Kenyon Drake all offseason. I also said that Chase Edmunds would be a fine at minimum standalone value in that 9th, 10th round area where he's going. And the way week 1 looked, he definitely got his opportunity. So talking about the matchup against Washington football team, they stifled the Eagles' ground attack to 57 total yards on 17 combined carries. Again, we will see if they're able to replicate that week 1 showing, if they're going to revert back towards their 2019 performance that had 22.6 points per game to the running back position, 4th most league-wide. So when you're actually breaking down Edmunds, it's not necessarily something where, I'm going to pick him up, just throw him into my lineup against Washington. With Edmunds, you're getting a super talented back that he showed he was in week 1, and he's still going to be very involved in the Cardinals' game plan, even with Kenyon Drake. So, again, because of the presence of Kenyon Drake, I wouldn't bid more than 20%. But with Chase Edmunds, the reason why you're getting a ton of value at that 20% is, again, standalone value in itself, and if anything were to happen to Kenyon Drake, he would be a bona fide RB1 top 12 back weekly, as we see plain and simple, he's going to be ahead of where Kenyon Drake currently is right now, because while Kenyon Drake is fending off Chase Edmonds, if anything were to happen to Drake, Chase Edmonds would have the backfield to himself, sharing with a 7th-round rookie and Eno Benjamin, which wasn't a factor in week 1. So, again, but the presence of Kenyon Drake will limit his immediate upside. But I do think at 20%, even if you're at 5th, 6th waiver priority, if you're not using the FAAB system, I definitely think you can be a very worthwhile pickup for your fantasy team. So, talking about the next guy, it's going to be Josh Kelly, running back from the LA Chargers, currently at 13% ownership in Yahoo League. So week 1, glossing over his stat line of 12 rushing attempts, 60 rushing yards, and a score. Didn't get involved in the passing game, but if you're actually looking at it for his week 2 tilt against KC, the KC defense allowed 118 rushing yards and 22 total attempts to the Houston Texans. And quite frankly, a guy I've been harping on all offseason, David Johnson, he looked really good. He looked really efficient. He looked rejuvenated against the Chiefs. And I will say, week 1, it's not looking good for my prediction, but we'll see how he ends up for the next few weeks. But David Johnson, I will say, looked like a really good back in that game on Thursday night. So talking about Josh Kelly again, once Justin Jackson went down with his quad injury, Kelly sees the complimentary role to Austin Eckler. He was able to actually get 12 attempts in the second half, and most notably 4 red zone carries with a 75% rushing success rate according to Sharp Football Stats. So if you're mentioning a total like FAAB bid on him, I would say around similar to Chase Edmonds in that 20% range. I would expect more immediate production from Kelly because, again, I mentioned it all offseason, but that role that Melvin Gordon leaves behind, 204 touches in 12 games or 17 per game, is still vacated. While I do think Austin Eckler is going to take a more of a bell cow type role, as we saw in week 1, again, 20 attempts from him, I do think there is plenty of volume to go around for the guys behind him. And if Justin Jackson is going to be missing time with quad injury, Kelly is the next in line to see that opportunity. And if he's able to, if he's able to repeat that week 1 performance, I don't see why LA would take him out of that role. So Josh Kelly looked really good week 1. Make sure you go get him in your fantasy league. So the next running back we're going to be talking about is Adrian Peterson, running back from the Detroit Lions. So currently 46% ownership in Yahoo leagues. Again, glossing over his week 1 stat line, 14 rushing attempts, 93 rushing yards. And in the receiving game, he did have a role, 3 targets. I believe that's 3 receptions, but it doesn't say there. And 21 yards. So really good performance against Chicago. Week 2 is going to be ending up going against the Green Bay Packers. So, AP could find the end zone in this one. Will continue to be Detroit's 2-down back. More of a bench piece at this point than an immediate plug and play, but he's got a safe floor, in my opinion, because of the usage. Again, projecting long-term for Detroit's going to be kind of a mess because they still have, in my opinion, the most talented back in that system in DeAndre Swift, who dropped the game-winning touchdown. That was a heartbreaker for me as a Swift fan, but I do think soon enough it is going to be Swift's team, and they still got Kerryon Johnson there too. So for the immediate future, I do think Adrian Peterson can give you some flex value. Again, give you a nice safe 8 to 12 type PPR points floor, but he's not going to be a guy who's going to win you your week. So anything more than 10% is going to be going to be a lot. Even 10% kind of feels like a lot, but if you're looking for a floor play, a safe lock to put in your lineup for the next few weeks, I do like ending up getting Adrian Peterson as a flex play for your team. So going off the running back position, we're going to actually enter the wide receiver position. And the one that I am most excited about is going to be Paris Campbell, wide receiver from the Indianapolis Colts. So he's currently owned in 22% of Yahoo leagues. And glossing over his week 1 stat line against the Jacksonville Jaguars, he had 6 receptions on 9 targets for 71 receiving yards. And he also added 9 rushing yards. So looking at his next matchup against the Minnesota Vikings, we saw what happened to Minnesota against Devante Adams if you guys were all watching on Sunday. 17 targets, 14 receptions, 156 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Again, you're not going to expect Paris Campbell to absolutely replicate one of the best receivers in the NFL's performances, but that just goes to show that the Minnesota Vikings are susceptible in the back end. Again, replacing a ton of pieces. Xavier Rhodes out. Now they're actually relying on Mike Hughes, who's been injured on and off through the rest of his through the most part of his NFL career, adding 2 rookie corners in Gladney and Dantzler. Definitely that whole secondary kind of struggled in week 1. So if you're actually looking at it, if Paris Campbell's able to be Rivers' favorite target as he showed in week 1, he can sneak into the end zone and give you a 20-point a week against that Vikings putrid secondary. So with Mac out, that also adds opportunities in the passing games. I mentioned it for Nyheim Hines. I do think Paris Campbell can still supplement a good receiving role in that offense. If you're talking about FAAB potential, I'd probably say around 20% for him. Again, most of your FAAB is going to go to those two or three high-end running backs this week. But if you're trying to get Paris Campbell, you're in that mid-waiver priority, 6, 7, 8. I do think he's a fine selection at that point. I wouldn't spend the number 1 or 2 waiver on him, but if you kind of get him that mid-tier, I'd like that selection for your waiver. So, again, talking about 20%, Campbell slated to come out strong last year, ended up dealing with a ton of injuries. He could be the top scoring receiver in Indy this year. I mean, we've talked about Michael Pittman all offseason. Still like Pittman for the long term, but, man, the way Paris Campbell played in week 1, it does look like he was that number 2 threat coming in. And if T.Y. Hilton, plain and simple, still has the issues that we've talked about all offseason in terms of injuries, in terms of volatility, Paris Campbell could supplement a really good role in a high-volume Indy passing game, especially led by Phillip Rivers. So love Paris Campbell. Try to get him on your waiver wires. Talking about the number 2 option at the wide receiver position, in my opinion, it's actually going to be Robbie Anderson, wide receiver from the Carolina Panthers, currently at 31% ownership in Yahoo leagues. So, talking about week 1, again, against the Las Vegas Raiders, 6 receptions on 8 targets, 115 receiving yards, which included actually a 79-yard bomb of a touchdown and a 2-point convert. So, week 2, he does play a Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense that will be focusing on slowing down CMC. Anderson still has home run type potential in this game, and he's shown a chemistry with Teddy Bridgewater. So if you're talking about a third option for the Carolina Panthers, again, obviously we know the top 2 options are going to be CMC and DJ Moore. Robbie Anderson figures to be the best bet as the number 3 option on what should be a high volume passing offense. And if that's the case, I mean, Robbie Anderson is going to be seeing a good flex wide receiver 3 type role for your lineup. So definitely like him. Again, 20% similar to Campbell. Given what we've seen this past week, that Bridgewater-Anderson connection could be very real this year. Again, they were on humming against that Las Vegas Raiders secondary. I mean, you just don't usually see a receiver's first game with the team, albeit it was a quarterback's first game as well, and just see 8 targets right off the bat. Robbie Anderson could definitely be the real deal for fantasy football this year. So betting that 20% around range is a fair bid for him, in my opinion. Depending on how your league is, you could probably even get him for cheaper because people aren't really focused on him. So going into the next option section going to be Preston Williams, wide receiver from Miami. It doesn't say on the screen, but he's actually at 38% ownership in Yahoo leagues. So again, crossing over his week 1 stat line against New England. Not too great. 2 receptions on 7 targets for only 41 yards. But the main reason why he's here is because of the injury of Devante Parker. Again, as you guys can see on the screen, Devante Parker suffered a hamstring injury. Actually missed majority of the second half. I believe he got injured at the beginning of the third quarter. And if he's going to be missing significant time, again, those hamstring strains are a mess to deal with from a fantasy football perspective, from a real-life perspective. If he's going to be missing time or if he's going to be playing limited in games, I do think the majority of the Miami Dolphins passing offense is going to revolve around Preston Williams and Mike Gesicki until he returns to full strength. So looking at the matchup against Buffalo, again, Buffalo just yielded 7 for 19 and 1 stat line to Jamison Crowder. Again, albeit he was running mostly from the slot, but that just goes to show that they are susceptible to receivers putting up production for them against them. Sorry. And if you're talking about a potential FAAB bid on a guy like Preston Williams, I'd say around 50% is probably around an optimal sizing for him. Again, operating as a wide receiver 1 for the Dolphins, he's in line to see enough volume to make him fantasy relevant for the time being. He can definitely be a really good flex play because of that said volume. So, like Preston Williams. Talking about the next name, a guy I have touted all offseason as a potential sleeper. You guys can check out that sleepers video on the NFC, or the preview on the NFC South, but talked about Russell Gage as a sleeper. 2% ownership in Yahoo leagues. He's just scared me. 2% ownership in Yahoo leagues. Week 1 against Seattle was able to produce 9 receptions on 12 targets for 114 yards. Talking about that Seattle game, man. Those Atlanta wide receivers were phenomenal. All of them receiving 9 receptions and 114-plus yards. I mean, that Atlanta passing offense is humming. Week 2, they enter a tilt against the Dallas Cowboys. It could be a shootout where Matt Ryan could throw for a ton of yards again. Again, 450 yards against a Seahawks secondary that is at minimum above average. You're facing off against a Cowboys secondary who is unproven, had a good showing against the Los Angeles Rams, but ultimately, as I mentioned, the game script in this one could be heavy scoring, especially with how putrid the Atlanta secondary is. According to PFF, AJ Tyrell actually was the worst graded cornerback in Week 1. If that's going to be the case, the Atlanta passing offense is going to have to supplement that loss on defense. And that week one of seeing 12 targets just shows that he has trust from Matt Ryan. Again, we could be seeing Russell Gage have a weekly 6 to 8 target type range. And if that's the case on a high-octane offense, he's definitely worth that 15% type FAAB potential. Again, I do believe this is a situation where we're going to see 3 guys per week snap between Julio, Ridley, Gage, and Hurst, and one of them is going to disappoint. So the reason why I'm kind of at only 15% here, again, if it wasn't that case, I would put him much higher, 25, 30%. But Hurst active, I do think he's going to acclimate a bigger role. And if he does receive a higher target output, I do think that's going to come strictly from Gage's target total. So that's one to watch, but 15% is definitely worth it for a guy with as much upside as we saw on Sunday. So love Russell Gage. Talking about the next receiver, it's a guy that's definitely burned a ton of people in the past. I don't have his percentage rate on here, unfortunately, but it's actually Corey Davis from the Tennessee Titans. So as we saw on Monday night, again, week 1 against Denver, 7 receptions on 8 targets for 101 yards. Week 2, he does play the Jacksonville Jaguars secondary that conceded 363 passing yards to the Indianapolis Colts. And with the defense and C.J. Anderson likely focused on A.J. Brown, Davis could be primed to build upon that explosive week 1 performance. So when you're talking about Davis, obviously, he's a guy that's burned many of us in the past, but these next few weeks will be defining for whether week 1 was a mirage or if he's actually going to be the real deal for the course of the 2020 season. So talking about a potential FAAB bid, I would say around 10% is probably optimal for him. Talking about that, again, building in the risks associated with what we have gotten with Davis in the past leads to that 10%. If we were not burned from him in the past, if we didn't see these mirages before, I would say he would be definitely on par with the Campbells, the Russell Gages, those guys at around 20 to 25%. But again, because of that risk, I would probably near him about 10%. Hopefully this time we're getting the real deal, but you just can't ignore 100 yards and 8 targets in week 1. So like Corey Davis coming off waivers. Talking about tight ends, segueing into it, obviously off receivers into the tight end position. The main guy is going to be Dallas Goedert, tight end from the Philadelphia Eagles. He's at currently 55% ownership, barely meeting the threshold set for this video. But if he's available in your league, 45% of leagues he is, go and grab him. 8 receptions on 9 targets for 101 yards and 1 touchdown week 1 against a Washington Redskins defense that generally stuffed the Eagles all around, but Dallas Goedert still had a game. So if you're looking at it, week 2 against LA Rams, obviously LA didn't give up much to the Dallas tight ends, but Blake Jarwin, ripped the Blake out, but man, torn ACL out for the year. Dallas was relying on a tight end in Dalton Schultz that frankly isn't quite good, whereas Dallas Goedert actually is quite good. And if you're actually mentioning in terms of offensive philosophy, Dallas has 3 number 1 wide receivers, while Carson Wentz is one to hyper target his tight ends. Again, the receiving game, we don't necessarily know what's going on. I mean, Deshaun Jackson, Jalen Reagor are kind of volatile in terms of week-to-week production, and Miles Sanders is still coming off a hamstring injury. Boston Scott, there's tons of question marks in that secondary, in that backfield. So what's Carson Wentz known for doing? He's going to target his tight ends. We know how good Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert are. Dallas Goedert is going to be a top target for this Philly offense basically for the rest of the year. I mean, he's the number 2 target for Carson Wentz in his mind. So if you're actually looking at it, Goddard was a tight end 1 last year, and he's showing us that he can keep that title again. So talking about a FAAB potential, I would even say up to 45% if you're absolutely needy at the tight end position, because Goddard can absolutely be your starting tight end every single week, in my opinion, with what he showed in week 1 in terms of involvement. So love Goddard, barely meets the threshold, but if he's still available on your waiver wire, make sure you go pick him up again. 45%, I'd feel fine with spending on him. Logan Thomas, 2% owned on Yahoo. Again, week 1 stat line against the Philadelphia Eagles. 4 receptions, 8 targets, 37 yards, and a score. So if you're looking at this matchup against Arizona, again, they did pretty good against George Kittle week 1, albeit George Kittle was hurt, so you got to keep that in mind. But they were the worst team against the tight end position in 2019. So is week 1 a mirage? Are they going to stick to that? I don't know, but I'll take the proven model of the 2019 season that they showed against the tight end position again. Isaiah Simmons kind of struggled in week 1, so we'll see how he adjusts. But if you're talking about Logan Thomas in terms of involvement in that Washington football team offense, again, he saw a 25% target share in week 1. Actually over, to be honest, because he had 8 targets on 31 total attempts from Dwayne Haskins. So you do the math there, that's about 8.3%, or 25.3%. So if you're actually looking at it, if Thomas sees a weekly 25% target share, he will be one of the most reliable tight ends in the game, especially in the red zone, as we saw in week 1 with that score. If you're talking about foul potential, because he's kind of unproven, I would say 10% is going to be able to get him. Not a lot of people in your league are going to look at him and just see, oh, I got to pick this guy up. But if you're actually looking under wraps, the thing I look for is that 8-target involvement in an offense that frankly has question marks in terms of weapons outside of Terry McLaurin and maybe Steven Sims, other than Logan Thomas. So I don't think you'll have to break the bank, but because of the low yardage total, but you can get him. He could be a steal if he keeps earning Haskins' trust. So talking about the next option at the tight end position, we're going to be going over OJ Howard, tight end from Tampa Bay. So currently 17% ownership in Yahoo leagues. Week 1 against New Orleans, 4 receptions on 6 targets, 36 yards, and a score. Week 2, he gets to play a Carolina defense. So Howard comes off a solid showing against New Orleans, and while Carolina is kind of stingy against tight end position historically, if Howard is involved to the tune he was in week 1, he is well worth a bid, in my opinion. Again, Howard showed why the fantasy football community touted him as a huge 2019 breakout and was arguably Tampa Bay's best offensive player on Sunday. If he keeps performing the way he did in week 1, there's no reason to think why Tom Brady would not target him the way he did. So, talking about foul potential, again, because of Gronk's presence still being there, I wouldn't be doing more than 5%. But in my opinion, he's a worthy gamble given the upside if he is able to continue getting Brady's trust. So, great performance from an option in OJ Howard that is uber talented. If he's still going to be involved in that offense the way he was in week 1, I would be much willing to spend that 5% FAAB on him. So if you're talking about defensive streamers, getting off the tight end position, we're going to be talking about my favorite 3 streamers for week 2 in fantasy football. We're going to be talking about the Arizona Cardinals defense, which is only 3% owned in Yahoo against Washington football team. We got the Tennessee Titans defense at 51% owned against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And we got the Los Angeles Rams defense, 48% against the Philadelphia Eagles. Talking about Arizona, again, Washington, question mark all over with that offense, as I mentioned. Again, I like Logan Thomas, I like Terry McLaurin, I like Dane Haskins, and Steven Sims, but we'll see what they actually are able to do from a consistency basis. Not really that type of offense you're scared of. And if you're talking about the Cardinals, again, that's going to be a team that's going to be up for the majority of the game. If that's the case, I do think they're going to be able to pin their ears back, cause a ton of turnovers for a team in Washington that's unproven on the offensive end. Tennessee Titans, I mean, one of the top defenses in the league overall. They get a matchup against Jacksonville, who was super efficient in week 1, but ultimately still is a team that has its struggles on offense. I love Gardner-Minchu, but plain and simple, that overall offense is a question mark. So Tennessee Titans have proven to be a tough defense to play against. I do think that they can have a low-scoring affair and ultimately cause some turnovers for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So my favorite matchup actually out of these 3 is actually going to be the Los Angeles Rams defense against the Philadelphia Eagles, the banged-up Philadelphia Eagles that gave up 8 sacks to the Washington football team. PFF actually graded their pressure rates in terms of allowed per offensive line, and it actually was a shock to see that the Dallas Cowboys allowed the third highest pressure percentage at 40% when they played the LA Rams. The Philadelphia Eagles allowed a 34% pressure rate, which was actually 4th to the Washington football team. So look at it. The Los Angeles Rams get after the quarterback, and the Philadelphia Eagles cannot block to save their lives at this point. So if you're talking about a Washington football team defense that put up 8 sacks, 5 different players, 19, just get this stat into your head, right? 19 total players on the weekend put up 4 or more pressures. 5 of them were on the Washington football team. Now the Eagles have to go against the Los Angeles Rams defense that still employ Aaron Donald against a weakened interior. Got Leonard Floyd, got Michael Brockers. I mean, that defense is going to be flying around. That ultimately, again, if Wentz is going to be under pressure, we know his tendency to fumble the football. And if they're going to be playing under wraps, under pressure, I do think that it can cause some turnovers on the back end with Jalen Ramsey out there. So love the Los Angeles Rams defense this week. If you have a chance to stream them in any one of your leagues, go make sure they are picked up because they are going to be putting on a clinic this week against a battered Eagles offensive line. So, again, that'll wrap up the week 1 entering week 2 waiver show. This will be coming out every Tuesday for you guys. I'm going to try to get it out for the morning from now on, but this should be out at about 12:31 if you're watching this. Again, go make sure you put these claims in. We all know Waiver Wire Wednesday is coming, so make sure you get your claims in, get your FAAB right, and aside from that, football's back, y'all. Week 2 coming up. You better be hyped. Leave how hyped you are in the comments. If you have made it this far, make sure you go like, comment, subscribe down below for daily content in terms of fantasy football. But I'm Danny. Peace out, y'all.